Eric George is with me today on Higher Ed Athletics. He is the Assistant Vice President and Deputy Athletic Director at Rice University. He's been there since December 2023, and prior to that, he spent about 4 years at Mississippi State as the Deputy AD and CFO, 4 years at Clemson as the Associate AD and CFO, and 2.5 years at Texas as an Assistant Business Manager. He also spent a couple years after college at Deloitte. He is a CPA, accounting background. And in this conversation, we talk first about what he's been proud of most at Rice, then what he's learned from, look at the ADs he's worked with, Tommy McClelland right now, Dan Radakovich, Graham Neff, and John Cohen, learning from other ADs and deputies that he doesn't necessarily know and how he learns, whether it's podcasts or watching athletic director press conferences. He has an interesting note-taking strategy that is actually a tablet, which is something I might have to look into investing in. And then we kind of shift to about the career mapping, about his decision-making process for job opportunities, how he discusses that with his wife, the honesty of not really knowing or being able to pick and choose when jobs even open up. But there's a reason why he went to Rice as well. And then we talk about balancing ambition with being the best deputy athletic director for Rice. And then as we kind of near the end, I've always been thinking about this as part of my dissertation, the evolving role of the athletic director. And so two things stick out with that. He doesn't have a big fundraising background, although he's doing that now with Rice and learning from Tommy. But he is a strategic thinker, a former CFO, a former international tax law person. You have to be smart to be able to do those things. And so he's kind of putting his strategic thinking to work and flexing that muscle. And I think it's a trend in college athletics right now. And then I asked him about his thoughts on this FBS level, at least, of younger athletic director hires and what he is thinking about that and what he is kind of doing about that in his own career. So this is a conversation I really enjoyed. Can't wait to visit Rice one day. Sounds like a lot of exciting things happening. So big thanks to Eric George for visiting with me on Higher Ed Athletics. What are one or two things so far in your tenure at Rice? Because we're going to talk about a lot of your career, but I really want to just focus this first question on Rice University, where you're at now, obviously.
Yeah, we've got a lot of exciting things going on, and part of what attracted me to Rice was the idea that we were going to have a massive stadium renovation, what we're calling the Gateway Project, where we're connecting kind of our entertainment district across the street from campus to our stadium and modernizing our stadium. And so kind of running the day-to-day project for that and meeting with the architects, the design team, going through that process. It's been a lot of work, but incredibly exciting, and it's going to be so rewarding here over the next year or so as we break ground and then through the 27 season into completion. I've been really excited to see what that's going to look like, and it just signals to the outside world that times are different at Rice, that there's an investment being made, that athletics matters, and it's something that, like I said, really attracted me here. But it's a visible sign to the rest of the world that things are changing and that big things are in store for us. And then the other
What's
part,
the size of think about capacity of the stadium, like put it in people's heads, like, so how big is your current stadium? And then also I think a lot of people realize that it's in Houston and in a pretty big city. So how big is the stadium? Then kind of give us some geography of like how close is Rice to University of Houston? Like what kind of separates you all, like distance wise?
yeah. So we're only, to take the second part of your question, we're only about 3 miles from Houston, from University of Houston. Now that may take you 30 minutes in the car depending on traffic, but if you just hop in the bayou and float down, it goes basically from one campus to the other. So as the campuses sit about 3 miles apart, Rice is kind of on the the southwest part of downtown, and then University of Houston's on the southeast part. Um, and we are right across the street from the medical district. So as you go downtown into the medical district, and then you run into Rice's campus. So it's a beautiful campus, kind of feels like an oasis right in the middle of downtown. And the stadium itself was built 75 years ago. It's one that it's hosted a Super Bowl. It's where JFK gave his speech about going to the moon. So there's a lot of history with the stadium. And at the time, Rice was in the Southwest Conference and was kind of one of the bigger conferences, one of the P4s of the day. So the stadium holds about 62,000, and that's it's massive for today's standards in a school that has 4,500 to 4,800 undergrads. And so we are going to kind of right size that. We're going to take off some of the upper decks and add some premium seating, and try to get that down to a much more manageable number where we're kind of around 25 to 30,000, and feels more intimate and gives a higher end experience.
So if you are watching or listening to this episode with Eric George, you are probably a deputy yourself, or you're trying to become a deputy because you know that's what you need to get to next to be an athletic director at the Division I level. Well, I want to help you design your career based on the latest trends. I've been studying the AD position at the D1 level since 2019. I have more than 40 hours of interviews with D1 athletic directors and 10 plus college presidents about the AD position. I also have tracked every single AD hire since January of 2020. And most recently, looking at trends for my dissertation, quite literally on the evolving position and backgrounds of athletic directors in the last 18 months. So if this is something that interests you, you want my help to kind of have a conversation, several of you have reached out. I haven't been able to package it the right way, but I am now offering 1-hour sessions on Zoom, one-on-one with me. I'll open up my research. We'll look and see your interests, where you want to be at, what part of the country, what your career's been up to at this point, but then also what are those strategic moves when you see opportunities come up. I want to help you. Just reach out to Travis at higheredathletics.com, or if you go to higheredathletics.com, go to the bottom of the screen, and on the menu, you'll see it says career mapping. And you can also just fill out the form there, and it'll go right to my inbox. Let's have a conversation and get you where you want to go. So that stadium project, one thing that you're leading. Anything else kind of sticking out of your tenure now that you're kind of excited about leading through?
Yeah, I think the other one was just our NIL adjustment and coming of age with the new landscape and how the industry is moving. When I got here, we had three kind of individually created collectives that were started by former letter winners in their respective sports, with football, men's basketball, and baseball, and then kind of our work with those to bring them together into one consolidated collective. And then as the House settlement came into place, how we adjusted, bringing on and hiring an associate AD for NIL, and just kind of our overall plan and how we've progressed through the contracts and set those up. I think we've been very strategic with how we've done it. Obviously, we're not at the P4 level where we're going to be able to throw $20.5 million into it, but we've been very thoughtful about the balance of scholarships, which at a place like Rice really does move the needle. When tuition is $85,000 a year, having an increase in scholarships is as good as NIL in some cases. And so just how we've balanced those and used it in a way to come up with what we think is a very competitive and thoughtful approach to it.
Let me ask you, what do Clemson, Charlotte, Coastal Carolina, and Boise State have in common? These athletic departments decided to use data with context, turning that data into action in hiring coaches, writing contracts, and doing long-term planning. They did this by partnering with AD Vantage. After 10 plus years as a D1 college coach, founder and CEO Tanner Stump saw a gap. Athletic administrators didn't have the tools to find not just the best coach, but the right coach for their program at their institution at that time. Most industry solutions he did see were expensive, outdated, or lacked sport-specific insights. So he decided to build AD Vantage from the ground up, bootstrapped, customer first, and focused on the future of college athletics. Before we joined forces, Tanner let me get my own username and look under the hood as an AD looking to hire some coaches. And I can truly say this is a company and product that athletic directors and sport administrators need. Visit athleticdirectorvantage.com to get a demo. Tell them Travis from Higher Ed Athletics sent you, and ask them about the rating score they created called Coach Effect. You've learned from a lot of great athletic directors, and looking at your background, just curious if you could share what you've learned from people like your current AD, Tommy McClelland. You've worked with at Clemson. You had Graham Neff, you had Dan Radakovich, and then you had also John Cohen when you're at Mississippi State. I mean, that's a pretty good list of people to learn from, I'd say. So I'm always kind of curious from deputies about what they've learned. And you don't have to talk about each individual one. You can definitely go themes. But I am curious, like, how are some of them similar? How are some of them different as well?
Yeah, no, I've been so fortunate to learn from some great leaders, and even some that haven't been named on that list, but just an incredible group of people, leaders, thoughtful, intelligent, smart, but also just the type of people that they are. And starting with kind of my time and coming up through the business office ranks, being at Clemson with Dan and Graham, who also kind of had that business background. It was kind of just a comforting thing for me to know that they understood my path. They had lived my progression, and it was, I was able to learn from them and see them, and they knew what I had been through. And then the really interesting thing about John that I think has shaped me in a great way is, he was a head coach. He was a very successful head coach, and so whenever he walked into a room, he had a different level of respect from the coaches than I will ever have, because he was in their shoes and he did it very well. But just seeing how he thought through things and his approach, a lot of times we came up with the same answer, the same end result, but his thought process and how he got there was so different. And from coming from a numbers background where everything was very analytical, John was also analytical, but John thought about it from a coach's perspective, recruiting and student athlete development and retention of the student athletes. So it just gave me a whole different perspective. And then, coming here where Tommy's been an AD from basically the time he started his career, and he is much more on the external fundraising side, and just seeing how he approaches conversations with donors, how he handles things from a political landscape. I've gotten to take away pieces from each one that have shaped me and kind of made me. You still have to be who you are. I can't pretend to be Graham or Dan or Tommy, but seeing them and learning from them and taking away tidbits has really helped, because they've all kind of each stop has had a very different leadership style, and it's been very, very beneficial to me.
Yeah, I actually, when I was looking at your background, Graham really stood out, because I wasn't as familiar with Dan's background, but like Graham, I studied when I did like an analysis on like, would he go to the Georgia Tech opening or something, or he would stay at Clemson. So I dug into his background a little bit more, and then so when I saw that, I was like, it seemed similar to yours from a beginning phase. And then you get the luxury of, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but Tommy, really was a young athletic director, and then he goes and he does that for a while, and then he's at Vanderbilt as a deputy, and then he comes to Rice. I mean, we're going to talk later about the trends of young AD hires that's happening, but I'm sure he can offer some perspective of that too, as well. And so I'm also just kind of curious, like, about learning from the ones you've gotten to work for. Like, I always learn best from being around people. But what I notice is there's also so much content now, including my podcast, like people can listen to that. But I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you learn from ADs that maybe you don't work with? Like, things that I think about is, do you watch press conferences of ADs, like first time ADs and things like that? And then I'm sure, the Ticker's been putting out a lot of interview content from ADs. So just how do you like best learn?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things, and obviously, like you mentioned, watching press conferences, watching how they handle themselves, especially on the introductory press conference, which I hope to have the opportunity to do that at some point, and getting tips and pointers there. But one of the things that's been really beneficial for me is when I was at Mississippi State and we were in the SEC, we had a deputy group that met weekly for times, and then biweekly at others. and getting to know those guys who have now, guys and ladies who've now moved on to AD roles and keeping in touch with them. A lot of it, I'm just kind of getting, from individual phone calls and text messages and, hey, how did you approach this? Why'd you do this? I know you've had Chance Miller on here before, and Chance was one that was at South Carolina as a deputy when I was at Mississippi State. And so, talking to him, how he's assimilated into the head role and the big chair. And as you look across that group, about half of them have moved on to AD roles that I'm able to kind of have in my Rolodex of ones that I haven't worked with, but I still keep in touch with and learn from. And it's been awesome seeing their rise, but also been very helpful for me to kind of pick their brains and get to learn things.
Yeah, it's cool to think about. You all have kind of a group chat type of community. It sounds like a community right there that you've been able to build. And yeah, it's something I hope to do with bringing on deputies is that more of them get to kind of learn from you, because I think it's sometimes harder to learn from others in your like other than like seeing each other at conferences, things like that. But I did forget to mention I also had John was on the podcast Cohen whenever he was at Auburn, and so I agree with everything you said. His perspective of being able to hire a coach, because I do think you all have such evolving roles as deputies, and then whenever you ascend to the AD chair, you kind of pick and choose like who you get, like how did you like what Brian Blair did at Toledo and or what John did when he was at Mississippi State, and just getting to learn from different things. So kind of like how are you kind of go for tactical insights here, but do you keep like a binder of best practices? We talked about press conferences, but some people like keep the notes app on their iPhone. Just kind of curious, like how you tactically approach these things, and we can think back to Rice, and then also really any opportunity, say an AD job opportunity comes up, like how are you preparing? And this is usually a shameless plug for D1 dossiers, because I'm sure everyone mentions that. So it is a really good resource. But just kind of tactically speaking, someone's maybe a senior administrator, but not quite at the number 2 job. And let us into your head there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that the D1 dossier is incredible, and the amount of time it saves. But that's kind of more of a specific job by job resource. When you look at the bigger picture of how I approach things, I'm a big handwritten notes guy. I like to take handwritten notes, but I've got a tablet. It's called a Remarkable that they should probably give me a commission for the number of them that I've gotten people hooked on. But with that, you can do handwritten notes, but then you can export it into a cloud-based storage file. You can pull PDFs, and so I've got kind of a running list that's grouped by section of different things that I want to keep in mind when I get that opportunity. Excuse me. Some of it is the early stages, the first 90 days. What do you want to look at? Some of it is ideas for staffing. How am I going to structure my staff? What's that division look like? The hierarchy. Some of it's coaching searches. I've been fortunate enough to go through a handful of those, both with John and Tommy. And what are the things that I liked or didn't like? Because once you get into the process, it just comes so quick. So trying to kind of keep them in categories, so that when there are ideas that I like or quotes that are applicable, or notes from a press conference or D1 ticker. I will keep some notes on my phone initially as you go through of just something pops up, throw my phone real quick, but then I try to really go through and keep that list organized on my tablet so that I'm able to find it, as I go through and prep for an interview or, think about what's to come in the future. It's organized and nice and neat. But, I think as you get into the actual part of prepping for an interview, you pull in the dossier, you look at the different things that make each job unique, and then you're pulling from the pieces of notes that you have that are applicable to that job. Not everything's going to apply, in each situation. And so I think it's really important for me as I go through, what I think this is going to look like, how I'm going to approach the job, that I'm tailoring it to each individual job, and I'm not just taking a blanket set of notes that I've kept and just throwing it onto there. That I'm really being thoughtful and practical about how it factors into the job that I'm interviewing for.
Yeah, and I think institutional fit is always the two words that people go to, and it definitely makes sense. But I also think another one is situational fit. And what I mean by that is you talked about like, how a coaching hire might go, or like how I construct my staff. Well, you might get into a job search and realize that like there is no money for you to bring someone with you on your staff. Your staff is who you inherit. In
Mhm.
fact, if someone leaves, it might be a chance for you to reshift the job. But like some of these jobs, like if people don't want to become an AD, a lot of these jobs, people stay. Like I've looked at every single D1 staff directory countless times as I'm trying to like study things. And you'll see a lot of people don't leave because they love their job and they stay there. And so sometimes budget constraints, you're going to be stuck. And so that's another example of like you saying that not everything's going to fit, right? But like also coaching contracts. So okay, well with the dossier, you'll know like when a search might come up based on someone's success or not success. They could be good and move on, or they could be bad, and you might need to make a change. So I'm sure all that type of stuff. Like when you go into conversations about a job, um, I imagine like that has to come up too, right? It's like whenever you need to know what to say and what not to say, because if you talk about all this staff stuff and then they're like, everybody on the committee is like, I don't think he's gonna be able to bring two deputies with him. Like that's got to be a situational fit too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. No job is the same. No school is the same, and it could evolve over time too. It may be that when you come into the job, it's one thing, and over time it changes. So I think that's where having those notes and the best case scenario, ideal scenario is helpful, but you've got to be thoughtful about what are you actually walking into, or what are you interviewing for, and what are those notes, or what are those ideas that you have actually apply at that time.
Have you given, and I didn't plan to ask this, but like, sometimes as I'm building a business, not just a podcast anymore, like I will have conversations, like daily with Chat GBT. I've played with, other like Gemini things too. Like whenever you're like, is that something you'd ever consider putting your notes into, or like, do you communicate? Like, I don't know, you thinking through like having conversations with that, or you basically just like since you're a handwritten person, are you like anti using AI to give your thoughts to?
No, I'm certainly not opposed. I play around a little. I'm not an expert at AI by any means, but I do think it can provide helpful feedback. And as with anything, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You can't just take it and run with it. But I do think it gives a different perspective and allows you to maybe touch on some items that wouldn't have come to mind naturally. And so I'm not opposed to using it, but it's got to be done, uh, you know, thoughtfully and with a little bit of understanding that it's not perfect, so you can't just rely solely on it.
Yeah, I joked around with it once after I came up with my list of, I forget which AD insight video I was doing, like a prediction of like who I thought might be a good fit, and I just asked ChatGPT, I was like, "Hey, who do you think would be some good names for this job?" And I explained the job a little bit. It's far from being perfect, and I was basically like, you know, um, I could maybe turn my own research into my own chat bot to search, but like you can throw your filters in, but it definitely is not good at that at this niche of a market of predicting who the next athletic director at Syracuse is going to be, or something like that. But yeah, it's fun right now to just ask people about AI, especially as it kind of gets more into higher education too. We'll stick with career design, but like we talked about a lot of this, but I had Kevin White, not the new Charlotte athletic director Kevin White, but the former Dr. Kevin White, Danny White's and Brian White's dad, on the podcast whenever he released a book. And if I'll link it if I can. I think so many people need to watch the video I did with him, because we talk about this whole like designing your career. And Dr. Goodrich, Akron athletic director, was on recently too, and I asked him about this because he was kind of from that Kevin White tree earlier in his career, about designing the career. Like you were College Station, born and raised, and you played football for a little bit, and went to school at A&M, and so I'm sure you had this path that you were thinking about. as far as like your career design, like where you'd want to be. But like, just talk to me through your decision making process now. When you, I'm sure Tommy, like maybe Tommy sold you on Rice because you're more of a country guy, so you can talk about that. But I'm just kind of curious about your decision making process whenever opportunities actually do come up. I know you're probably not applying for every time someone, a search firm calls you, but like I'm just kind of curious, like your design making, like whenever you thought about that. And I'm sure Mrs. George was involved there too with coming up with a design. We both talked about how we have kids, but like just like, is this something you designed earlier in your career and you're sticking to it, or is it more just like, whatever happens happens?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think when I got in, I actually did international tax for 2 years right out of school, so I didn't go straight into athletics. And so whenever I did make the jump into athletics, like most, I wanted to be an AD. It's like whatever I can do to become an athletic director. And having done the business side, like going through the business office was the obvious foot in the door and choice to start my career. The thing that makes it very tough is your personal situation changes quite a bit over time. And so what I thought I wanted to do when I first got in at Texas has shifted. We had our first daughter at Texas and our next one at Clemson, and so the family aspect really starts to take hold and adjust. I still want to be an athletic director, but it's not a move at all times whenever something pops up like it was when I was younger. I've been very fortunate to be at some incredible places, and I do kind of leave some of that up to God to just say, there's a plan for me, and I'm going to follow it. And when I feel like I'm ready for a move or I'm compelled to make that move, I will. But so I'm not one of these that says I have to be an AD at 35, I have to be an AD at 40, I have to be this or that. I want to go places where I can be successful. I can add value to the department. I can work with people who are good people and doing things the right way, and most importantly, want to be somewhere where my family's going to be happy. And we're at a point now where my girls are getting a little older, and those moves become more and more challenging. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm never moving again by any means, but I have to be thoughtful about it. I can't just pick up and move, and then 6 months later move and take another job, and then a year later move and take another one. So my plan is ultimately still to be an AD, but to be thoughtful about what those opportunities are. And to your question about Tommy and coming to Rice, we didn't ever plan on coming back to Texas. That was not a goal that we had in mind, but we also never thought we'd live in Clemson, South Carolina, or Starkville, Mississippi. So I got to know Tommy really well when he was at Vanderbilt. We were both deputies, both in that group that I mentioned earlier, and just have a ton of respect for him, who he is as a person, as a father, as a leader. Obviously, hadn't worked with him directly, but seeing how he interacted with our group just really was one of those people that you said if I had a chance to work for him, I would love to. And then he gets the job at Rice, and a few months later makes the call. And it was an opportunity for us to be back closer to home. And one of the other things that was really important for me was like you said, I'm kind of a small college town guy, but I had only been at big public state institutions. And when you go Texas, Clemson, Mississippi State, they all were very similar. This was an opportunity for me to come to a high academic private school and see an entirely different side of things. And that's where I think I've been able to grow a lot in just the perspective, the ideas, how you approach things, the conversations with campus. It's opened up and unlocked an entirely different set of opportunities for me going forward in the future. And that's something Tommy and I've talked about a lot too. Was he was at McNeese and Louisiana Tech. Had he not gone to Vanderbilt, it would have been very hard to get the Rice job. But going to Vanderbilt unlocked a whole other set for him. And so I think I'm not one that's just making moves haphazardly. There is thought and intention behind it, but it's not always with the goal of becoming AD as quick as possible. It's going places where I can grow, where I can develop, where I can take things that I may not have seen, areas of inexperience, and and add more growth to those, and develop and become more well-rounded. So I think that's where I've been very blessed to have been the places that we've been, to make the friends and work with incredible leaders, incredible coworkers. So I wouldn't change anything, and been very grateful for the path that I've been on. Um, so the next step will be one that will be thoughtful and one that makes sense for all of us, and is a place where the girls can hopefully finish out school and wrap up their high school time, and we're not moving in the middle of that.
Yeah, and I joked with someone about this in a similar move question. Maybe it was chance, but I was like a nervous wreck whenever. So we live in my hometown now, but we moved a year ago, and I told you I have a 10-year-old and 7 and 4. So I wasn't really worried about the 4 and 7-year-olds because they hadn't been only through kindergarten for my middle son. We were just moving one town over, but you so some of you athletic directors. So I coming out of college wanted to be an AD, either high school or college. I got into college athletics compliance. I was on that route. Realized quickly is like it wasn't going to be in the cards for us to move around all the time. Like we needed to be in Indiana, and I was a nervous wreck taking our 10-year-old out to lunch to tell him like, hey, we're moving, and like we're moving 5 10 miles from where we were, and but I was like, it kept being on my mind like if we're going to make the move, like I'd rather, it needs to be sooner than later because there's just going to get more friendships. I cannot imagine the emotional toll, and I don't think it's talked enough about the emotional toll that it takes on a family, it takes on a marriage, when you're having like the spouse impact that you all have to have, like husband or wife of the AD, like that's got to be stressful too, unless it's kind of like, hey, we're on board. And it sounds like you all have kind of come together to make an educated decision on like what's in the best interest for the George family. And so that's what I respect about it a lot, is because it can't be easy having children that at some point there will be a move, but you don't necessarily know when. I can't imagine the emotional toll that takes on some people.
No, absolutely. It's tough, and I will say that the kids, the initial emotion is really high with kids, but they bounce back. They recover pretty quickly, and there's always something new and fun and exciting in the new place. And I do think, even having bounced around a little bit when I was a kid growing up, I do think it makes them more adaptable and better suited as adults to be able to handle different situations. But the spouse is your point. That's really the tough one. And my wife is a saint. She, well, one, just for putting up with me, but two, allowing me to have a career in this industry where she doesn't have any control. And I think that's really tough when, when I say she doesn't have any control, like we obviously discuss every job and every opportunity, and is that one that's right, but we don't know when those are going to pop up or where they're going to pop up. And so for her to just kind of have that blind faith that everything's going to work out, it's a lot to ask of somebody. And so I'm grateful that she puts up with me, but allows us to be able to have this life.
Well, this can be my plug to bookmark the D1 AD hiring trends and tracker on my website, so everybody knows the domino effect of what jobs are opening whenever things come up. But not joking aside, I think that's incredible. Before we get back to the show, I want to tell you about a new partnership I have with Onrise. So, for those that aren't aware, first 10 years of my career, I was actually a student athlete academic advisor. Mental health concerns and the betterment of student athletes has always been top of mind. So, finding a partner with the podcast where I don't really get to talk about that part of my life as much has been really helpful to kind of just showcase the great support that you can get. If you support student athletes, you know that mental health resources can be hard to implement, even harder to scale. Onrise provides complete mental health coverage, but built specifically for your athletes. With one call, programs can launch same-day access to peer support from retired athletes, licensed clinicians, and 24/7 crisis care. It costs less than hiring one full-time staff member, with no hiring hassles and no initiative fatigue for your department. To learn more, visit onrise.care. That's ONRISE.care. I do want to get back to the balancing. We've talked a lot about ambition. We talked a lot about why you came to work for Tommy. So for someone that is at the situation where they can pick and choose about where they're going to go and when, maybe, how do you collect all this learning but balance that job with the ambition? Like, you've got to be all in for Rice, and I'm sure you are, and it sounds like there is no immediacy to an exit, but like, things could happen. And so, like, how do you balance being the best deputy AD you can be for Tommy and Rice for the Owls, versus like, if a job opens up, that you need to be ready?
Yeah, well, I was told early on that the best way to get a better job or get promoted is to do a great job in what you're doing. And so I think I've got to I've got to be all in at Rice. I've got to do everything I can to do the best job to make Tommy look great, to make the department look great, and with that, it'll create opportunities for me. Now, when those opportunities come, you have to be ready for them. So I think the side part is the preparation, is the notes, the going through what my strategy is going to be when I get that opportunity. Everything we've talked about earlier, you have to do that on the side, but that can't be the focus. If the focus is what's coming next and what job am I going to get, and you're 1 foot out the door, then you're not going to do a good job where you are, and ultimately, then your reputation is going to be that you're looking for the next thing. I think you have to put your head down. You have to work hard. You have to be aware of what's going on. But if I'm not giving my best to Rice and I'm not doing everything that I can to make this the best possible job, then I don't deserve something else coming up. And so that's kind of been my thing, is really just pouring into this role, learning as much as I can, getting exposed to as much as I can, so that I'm ready when the opportunity comes. But I'm not neglecting my duties here and now in order to find that.
Yeah, and I put out insight videos and stuff, and like, I started, like, if I put a prediction out, or like, I'm just doing it to basically show my learning about the AD position while I turn this into executive search. I know once I start getting into search, I need to be hush hush about a search process. My 10 years of compliance, I promise everyone out there, I will be a quiet as a mouse whenever I'm actually doing a search. But until then, I am studying, and I'm basically building in public. And I've got probably like 10 people, 10 names that I think, with the evolving role of the AD position. And for some context, my dissertation I'm doing right now is on the evolving role of the FBS athletic director. And so I'm narrowed in, I'm basically in depth even more in FBS. And I keep about 10 names that I've studied over the last like months about who I think, with the direction, that might make sense for certain institutional and situational fits. And I will say the reason I reached out to you is because you were on that list of like, basically where I think the puck is moving, or sliding, or whatever hockey term you want, for the AD position. And the reason why is really about, I think it used to always be fundraising, and yes, that is very important. Donor fatigue is real, but strategic thinking has become kind of like this new buzzword, in my opinion, of what has to be in a candidate for an AD position. And you can go back to maybe coming out of college. You mentioned that you didn't start in college athletics. You were like Deloitte, and you have a CPA, so you're very much from the business side. And but I also think that comes with like knowing the numbers, also the attention to detail. So can you maybe kind of, you don't have the fun, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you I'm sure you do some fundraising, but like, you're probably known more for your strategic thinking. And I'm starting to see more of like revenue generation, different streams. Is this kind of like where you think things are going? And then is that what you would credit kind of your career to so far?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And fundraising is important, and always will be. And that was part of my incentive for coming here, was to see more of that external side and learn from an AD that was a true fundraiser. But absolutely, I think my background, when I first started at Deloitte, I did international tax consulting, and our whole division, our whole department was based on trying to find the most advantageous tax strategies. Now, obviously, I'm not doing that now here, thankfully, but I think those ideas, those concepts, are applicable to what we're doing. And as you look at what the pro sports are doing, you look at what uh, corporations are doing, you're kind of pulling from different areas. You can't just be focused on the same old college athletics as it used to be. And so how can we come up with unique creative ideas that work for Rice? We talked earlier too about the situational fit. Just because something is working at A&M or Texas right up the road doesn't mean it'll work here. So you have to be thoughtful in how can you take concepts and ideas that are gaining traction, but then apply them to how we're doing it, and how can you come up with unique ways to generate revenue, to generate fan support, even to get university buy-in. A lot of the things that we're trying to do here involve getting our students more engaged. And so we did free beer. We had a football game coming up. It was the Saturday leading into Thanksgiving week, and a home game, and a lot of students were leaving. So it was like, what can we do to get the ones that are on campus here? And if
Free
you're
beer,
at
do
if
it.
you're at Mississippi State or Texas or A&M, you're not doing free beer for the students. There's no way. But it's something that's a little unique here that we could do that got a lot of great attention, got the students out, and so I think that as you that you have to be creative and thoughtful and strategic. When you look at revenue streams, same way. Fundraising is important, ticket sales are important, but what else can you do to find ways to grow your resources, or even on the expense side, and how can you be thoughtful and strategic about what you're spending and how you're spending it? Are there ways that you can be more efficient in your operations to save a little bit to put towards new priorities?
Yeah, that free beer reminds me like maybe you really do know Chance Miller as far as like the free concession stands. And we talk about free concessions and them doing a war reenactment at the 50-yard line at halftime of a football game. It's like he wouldn't give me. He said they have some other things up their sleeve, but he wouldn't give me any of the halftime for next year things they're going to try. But you get to be more creative. I feel like when you're at maybe a smaller FBS school like a Rice or like a Coastal Carolina that maybe would be harder. I mean, you take some shots on the internet from people if they don't
Absolutely.
like anything you do at like a Texas or Texas A&M. And just thinking of Texas, like I don't know if I'm right to be reading up about like what SMU is doing, but I see that as like a benefit too, where they're clearly doing some like trying to be creative with some things. Their senior administration versus maybe what he couldn't have done at Maryland that Damon can do at SMU. So that might be another luxury of being a smaller FBS, and they're still a power school, but fundamentally their departments structurally like an FBS, but like not like at the upper echelon of the Power Four. So
Mhm.
I don't know, just kind of I think that's where things are going with strategic. And then the other thing that I think is happening that we're seeing a lot at New Mexico, which I thought that Ryan Berryman was just like the only real play there that made sense for New Mexico. Talk about good situations, but young ads at New Mexico State, UL Monroe, Charlotte, these are all first time young ads, and it's becoming a trend. And we're seeing it with coaches too. And there was an article out about like the success Miami is having with their coach being a young coach, taking them as far as he did in year one, and that you can take maybe more of a risk with a coach that you maybe don't they don't command a Nick Saban salary or something like that. But with an AD, I really do think it's becoming a trend because the role is changing so much that like you almost need someone that's not tied to being a traditionalist. And I think we
Mhm.
saw this at Charlotte. Like they had a great athletic director, but clearly the reason they moved on was to get someone with a fresh approach, and that's what ended up having Kevin White there. So what are you and like I'm sure your industry colleagues are like I think you and me are probably similar age. Like you're probably between 35 and 40 if I had to guess based on like graduation data. But
Yeah.
what are you all thinking about with this younger AD trend? I'm sure it's encouraging, but someone also told me like you can't if you mess up being a young AD, it might be your only chance. So it's also comes with some pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still feel young, unless I'm getting out of bed in the morning and everything's creaking and popping. But I think it's great as someone who's trying to be an AD, and that we are getting opportunities at younger ages to do it. I also think you've got to be ready from an experience standpoint. For some people that may be 35, for some people that may be 45. So uh, You never want to rush into something to say, hey, I want to do this as quick as possible if you're not ready for it. But I'm I'm excited about the shift that seems to be happening in getting those chances for younger ads to get their first crack at it. I think a lot of the reason is as you mentioned, the shift in the landscape, the need to have somebody that's innovative, that's flexible and nimble, that's not just going to be married to, hey, this is how we've done it for the last 20 years, this is how we're going to keep doing it. I think the energy part is a big factor. This job is demanding more and more time and energy, and if you're not solely invested in that, then it's hard. I mean, it's hard anyways. But when you look at the time demands, it makes it even more of a challenge. And so having somebody that may be fresher in their career, that may have a little more of that energy and excitement about it. And again, all this is not to say that you can't have that as an experienced AD, but I just think that maybe there's a perception that the younger ones are more nimble with NIL. They're more engaged and energetic, and so I think you're seeing them get opportunities, which is exciting. And then you've got to be prepared. You've got to be ready to go when you do get that chance, because like you said, it may not be your only chance, but if you come in and you're not prepared, you're not ready for it, then it could put you in a tough position, to kind of bounce back from.
Yeah, and before I just make everyone mad that's not considered a young AD candidate, this is really anecdotal from polling from what's actually been happening, but I'm mostly seeing it at FBS. I mean, Austin P State, FCS, they hired from their interim, and that made sense. And he was, I think 32 or something, but he was a former Govs baseball athlete, and he was already the deputy AD there. And I think it made sense for what they were trying to do. But the trend I'm looking at is FBS, and that I think is because you have these huge demands and these changes. I think at a non-football school, I think at maybe outside the Big East, but like I think outside the FBS, I think that there's less of a change. As the job title matters, but I think it's not necessarily getting younger. But what I'm talking about is we're seeing this at the FBS, and that's why I think it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. And so, yes, it's not an age critique, but I do think that you have to be more creative at the FBS level right now. And so that's kind of where I wanted to end things. So Eric George, AVP and Deputy Athletic Director at Rice University. Eric, thanks for being on Higher Ed Athletics. I appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Travis. I enjoyed it.